Okay, let's unpack this. You've shared a stack of sources with us, news reports, interviews, different perspectives, all revolving around a pretty intense situation involving the Medical Council of Thailand.
That's right. And a high-profile patient, former Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawatra. It's really where medicine, ethics, and the law all kind of collide.
Yeah, exactly. The core event we're diving into here is the Medical Council meeting on June 12th, 2025. They met to reconsider a previous disciplinary decision, didn't they?
They did. About doctors involved in Mr. Thaksin's treatment, specifically referencing his time at Police Hospital, often mentioned in the sources as Kun 14.
Con 14, that's the hospital location outside the standard prison infirmary, just so you listening know that reference.
Mm-hmm.
Our mission today is, well, to sift through everything you've given us, pull out the really important nuggets,
Mm-hmm.
understand the facts, the different viewpoints, and sort of get to grips with why this whole situation has captured so much attention.
It's definitely a complex picture, and the timeline is crucial here.
Absolutely. Let's start there. The sources show that back on May 8th, 2025, the Medical Council made an initial decision regarding 3 doctors involved in Mr. Thaksin's care at Police Hospital.
Correct. Their decision was disciplinary.
Mhm.
One doctor received a warning, deemed to have engaged in substandard medical practice.
Okay.
The other 2 doctors faced more severe action license suspensions because the council judge, they provided medical information or documents that were untrue.
But that wasn't the end of it, was it? According to the sources, just 20 days later, May 28th,
Yeah,
Mr. Somsak the Minister of Public Health, who also serves as the special president of the Medical Council, he stepped in.
he did. He exercised his right to veto that original decision, send the letter back, essentially kicking the decision back to the council for reconsideration.
And that veto is what led directly to this June 12th meeting we mentioned.
Exactly. So to understand what was really at stake in that meeting, we need to look closely at each of the 3 doctors' cases. And importantly, the differing reasons the council gave versus the minister's reasons for the veto.
Right. Let's zoom in on the first doctor, the one from the Department of Corrections hospital who just got the warning. What do the sources tell us about what actually happened?
Okay, so the sources state this doctor checked the patient on August 22nd, 2023, wrote a referral for specialist treatment outside the prison hospital, citing the lack of specialists inside.
Right. Standard enough, perhaps?
Well, then later that night, they apparently authorized the use of that referral by phone for the transfer. Just a verbal.
Oh. And the Medical Council looked at that and said, what was their issue?
The council felt this doctor didn't follow standard procedures. They argued, the doctor should have documented the patient's severity or vital signs during what was presented as a crisis. They also said the doctor should have explicitly clarified that the referral was based on the initial check for normal conditions and advised that any crisis info should be included with the transfer papers.
So their judgment was based on standard of medical practice and medical ethics. Is that right?
Yes, precisely. That was their stated basis.
Okay, so that's the council's view, rooted in professional standards. How did Minister Somsak see it differently when he vetoed this particular warning?
His perspective, based on the sources, was that the medical council hadn't really considered the specific circumstances or the relevant laws, or even the limitations the doctor might have faced in that, prison context.
Context matters, he's saying.
Right, and crucially, he pointed out there was no evidence that this doctor's actions actually caused any harm to the patient. So his reasoning for the veto cited medical ethics, other laws, and the circumstances.
But not standard of practice.
Exactly. Interestingly, not the standards of medical practice.
That difference in the basis for evaluation, that's key, isn't it? One focusing purely on procedure, the other bringing in this broader context.
Absolutely. It's a core point of divergence we see throughout this.
Okay, let's move on to the second case. The former chief medical officer at Police Hospital. This one got a license suspension from the council. What was he cited for in the sources?
So the sources detailed that this officer gave interviews to the media. This was August 23rd and 25th, 2023.
Right, I remember seeing reports about that.
In these interviews, he described the patient's conditions, mentioned high blood pressure, fear of stroke, the doctor's feeling fearful, a rapid transfer once the pressure lowered a bit. Later, he talked about heart echo findings, ongoing concerns, cough, shortness of breath, that sort of thing. Mentioned the heart and lung doctors were worried.
And the medical council's issue with those public statements?
They felt he provided incomplete medical information, that it didn't fully match the medical records, and it made the illness sound potentially more severe than the records alone supported.
Ah, okay. The perception versus the record.
Exactly. The council viewed this as a serious ethical violation, especially in such a high-profile public case. They stated it, quote, distorted the truth from the records and caused significant damage by creating this public perception that an urgent hospital transfer was absolutely necessary.
Even if the full records didn't quite back that urgency up, in their view.
That seems to be their point. And their basis for punishment was, again, standard of medical practice and medical ethics.
Okay. And how did the minister's veto counter this specific finding? What was his argument?
Minister Somsak's veto argued, again, that the council didn't consider the circumstances of those interviews. He noted they were like impromptu responses to reporters just outside his office, not prepared statements.
So spur of the moment stuff.
That's the argument. He was apparently tasked with explaining the necessity of the transfer from a medical standpoint. And furthermore, the veto pointed out he was relaying information from the treating doctors. He wasn't the treating doctor himself.
Right, so he couldn't give every single detail.
That was the justification. It limited his ability to provide completely comprehensive information right there on the spot. His veto basis. Same pattern. Medical ethics, other laws, and circumstances.
2 doctors down, and we see that pattern really emerging, don't we? Counsel on records and standard practice, minister on context, other laws, circumstances.
Definitely.
Let's look at the 3rd doctor then. The current chief medical officer at Police Hospital, also facing a license suspension from the council initially.
Yes. According to the sources, this officer issued formal medical opinions on September 15th and October 18th, 2023.
Okay, formal opinions. What did they say?
The September 15th one stated things like treatment not finished, need to treat surgical wound, examine and plan surgery for reported disease, and crucially, needs hospital care.
Right.
Then the October 18th opinion mentioned the patient needs urgent surgery due to severe pain, weak hand arm.
Okay, sounds serious. What was the medical council's problem with these formal opinions?
Well, the council's finding was that these opinions contained, in their view, untrue medical information. They got quite specific.
How so?
They noted this doctor is a neurosurgeon, but the patient's relevant surgery was likely orthopedic. So they questioned why he was giving these opinions instead of the actual treating or operating surgeon.
Ah, the specialty mismatch.
Right. And they felt he knew these opinions would be used to justify keeping the patient outside prison for longer periods past those 30 and 60-day regulatory marks.
Okay.
The council believed he should have specified the required duration of the hospital stay and provided clear, more verifiable reasons. Their conclusion was pretty strong.
Yeah.
Information untrue, suspicious, unfairly allowed the patient to stay out, potentially showed discrimination, and significantly damaged public trust.
Wow. And their basis, let me guess.
Standard medical practice and medical ethics. You got it.
And the minister's response in his veto for this 3rd doctor, did he follow the same pattern?
He did. Minister Somsak countered that the statements in these opinions were actually consistent with providing diligent patient care after surgery, during recovery, especially for a patient with multiple pre-existing conditions.
So just normal follow-up care opinions.
He described them as standard opinions the general surgeon responsible for follow-up might give. He argued the doctor's actions were not an ethical violation. And his basis, mirroring the others, medical ethics, other laws, and circumstances.
Okay, so let's just pause and bring this all together. Looking at the council's reasoning across all 3 cases versus the minister's vetoes, what really stands out to you from the sources?
What's absolutely fascinating, and I think it's the crux of the matter, is the fundamental difference in the criteria they use for judgment.
Right.
The medical council primarily based its decisions on the standard of medical practice, basically. Did the doctors follow the book? Did they document things right, follow professional norms, and of course, medical ethics, as the council defines them?
Focusing on the technical, the professional conduct itself, very internal to the profession.
Exactly. Whereas Minister Somsak, in his vetoes, consistently cited medical ethics, yes, but also other laws and the circumstances surrounding the events. And, as we noted, he specifically excluded the standard of medical practice from his stated reasons.
Which is huge.
He really is. It's not just a minor disagreement. It's a clash about the very basis for judging these doctors' actions. Is it purely about technopractice and professional rules, or should external factors like the specific situation, related laws, maybe even the lack of direct patient harm carry more weight?
And that fundamental difference in approach, that's what makes this whole situation so, well, contentious and why it led straight to that June 12th, 2025 meeting. The council had to revisit their own decision because the minister sent it back.
Yes, and the sources explain the rules for that reconsideration. To uphold their original decision, the medical council needed a hefty majority, 23 of its total members. That's 47 out of 70 members voting to stand by the initial ruling.
47 votes, that's a high threshold, and one member had to sit it out.
That's right. The chief medical officer of the Royal Thai Police, who is effectively the head of police hospital where the treatment happened, had to abstain. Clear potential conflict of interest there.
Makes sense. The sources mentioned there was pretty high anticipation for this meeting, a lot of eyes on it.
Definitely. Reports said 69 members confirmed they would be there, including all 35 elected members. That suggests really strong engagement from the council's own membership. They knew it was important.
And the minister himself, Mr. Somsak, he actually attended the meeting.
He did. Using his right as the special president, he was present. He was given a specific time slot. One source pinned it down to 15 minutes. 12:000 p.m. to 12:59 p.m.
Yeah.
to clarify and explain his reasons for the veto.
Straight to the council members.
Yeah. And the sources note he brought documents, 10 pages detailing his explanation, plus 2 extra pages relating to voting rights, referencing a Supreme Administrative Court ruling. He stated his aim was to ensure fairness, maybe head off any future lawsuits about member eligibility. Then he reportedly left after his speaking time was up.
So he presented his case directly, then let them deliberate. What was the atmosphere like around this meeting? According to the sources, what was the feeling?
The meeting was clearly under a microscope. The sources describe strong public sentiment running both ways. You had trends of support for the medical council's autonomy, but also efforts to discredit its process.
A real polarization.
Yeah. And some observers saw the situation was kind of highlighting a potential split within the medical community itself, between those prioritizing strict professional ethics and standards and those maybe perceived as being more aligned with political pressures or considerations.
Speaking of political pressure, were there specific reports or rumors about that?
Yes. One source references a report from a former senator, Somsak. He apparently suggested political efforts were underway. He mentioned rumors, and the source is careful to stress these were reported rumors, not confirmed facts.
Right, important distinction.
About potential benefits being dangled. Things like political positions, budget allocations, maybe even luxury cars, supposedly offered to influence the council's vote. Or perhaps just to cause the meeting to fail.
Yeah.
Maybe not enough members show up, or they can't reach that 23 majority, basically delaying a final decision.
So even if unverified, those rumors themselves show the perception of significant external pressure surrounding this whole thing.
Absolutely. That perception was definitely out there.
And how did the medical community itself react more formally?
Well, the sources noted quite a bit of activity. 750 doctors actually signed a petition calling for the medical council's final decision to be made public. Transparency was clearly a concern. And support groups also gathered, showing solidarity with the medical council, basically urging them to stand firm and uphold professional integrity and standards.
So let's step back for a moment. What are the real stakes here? What are the broader implications of whatever decision the medical council reached, or even just the process itself unfolding like this?
The stakes are pretty significant, and they definitely extend beyond just the 3 doctors involved. One major link, potentially, is to Mr. Thackson's own related legal situation.
Ah, yes, the court case.
Right. The Supreme Court, according to the sources, had a hearing scheduled for June 13th, 2025, literally the day after this crucial medical council meeting concerning the enforcement of his prison sentence.
So the timing is incredibly tight, and the council's decision could potentially feed into that legal process. How?
Well, that's the analysis offered by Stithorn Thanathocote from King Prajidapaksha Institute, as reported in the sources. He suggests the medical council's decision on the 12th, whatever the outcome, and regardless of any perceived pressure, it could serve as factual evidence for the Supreme Court.
Evidence of what, exactly?
Evidence related to whether standard procedures were followed in Mr. Thackson's case. The court is looking into that. So if the medical council were to uphold its original punishment, especially if its reasoning remained rooted in professional standards.
Like standard of medical practice.
Exactly. That might suggest to the court that, yes, abnormalities did occur in the doctor's professional practice. This could then potentially become relevant to the court's own consideration of how the prison sentence was being enforced.
And if the council's vote was split, or they overturned their original decision?
Stithorn suggests a divided vote within the medical council might lessen the weight the court gives to its finding. It wouldn't be as clear-cut.
Interesting. There's also their perspective offered by Dr. Tulsit Samwang in the sources. What was his take?
Dr. Toll seems to view some of the delays we saw, like documents being submitted late by Mr. Thackson's lawyer to the court, and maybe even earlier delays by the hospital to the medical council, as potential delay tactics.
Okay.
He speculates, and again, it's speculation reported in the source, about the possibility of Mr. Thackson leaving the country if he feels his legal position is getting weak, especially with that June 13th court date looming. Dr. Toulouse suggests Mr. Thackson should attend the court hearing to maintain credibility. He points out that not appearing could lead to an arrest warrant, and he draws a parallel to a situation 17 years ago. He seems to believe Mr. Thackson has been concerned ever since the Supreme Court appointed the panel to review his case, and also since the medical council started its own review.
So, putting it all together, what does this deep dive into these sources ultimately reveal about this whole situation?
I think the sources paint a picture of the medical council caught in a really delicate high-stakes position. Its fundamental role is to uphold professional standards and ethics in medicine.
Right, its core function.
But in this specific case, that core function is intersecting directly with a government minister's intervention, an intervention based on a different set of criteria, bringing in circumstances and other laws. And all of this is playing out against the backdrop of these significant, related, legal and political events involving a very high-profile figure.
So, the council's decision process isn't just about judging specific medical actions in isolation.
Not at all. It's being watched intensely as a kind of test case for the medical profession's autonomy and integrity when it comes up against perceived political influence or pressure. The outcome, whatever it was, inevitably impacts public trust, trust in medical regulatory bodies, trust in the profession. And, as we discussed, it could potentially have these ripple effects in related legal proceedings.
This has been a really fascinating look into such a complex issue, drawing directly from the details and the sources you provided. We've tried to dissect the original decisions, the minister's veto and his rationale, the specifics of that reconsideration meeting happening under intense scrutiny, and the potential downstream implications, especially for those legal proceedings.
It really does highlight the immense pressures professional bodies can face when they have to navigate cases that sit right at the intersection of technical expertise, public interest, legal frameworks, and, well, political dynamics. It's not straightforward.
Definitely not. So, to leave you, our listener, with a thought to consider based on this deep dive. When you see a professional body's judgment being challenged by a government authority, and that challenge rests on different criteria, bringing in things like circumstances and other laws, beyond just the professional standards, what does that reveal about the boundaries of professional autonomy? And maybe more importantly, how might such conflicts ultimately impact public trust, not just in the profession itself, but in the whole regulatory system designed to oversee it? Something to mull over.